First of all, thanks so much for having me here today. I thought what I'd do is just speak for 15, 20 minutes and then kind of open it up to questions. And where I want to start is with neuroscience and AI. And neuroscience and AI over the past recent years have co-evolved. They learn a lot from each other. And this is very well told in Max Bennett's book, A Brief History of Intelligence, which is a fantastic book about the history of intelligence. And each field, the insights from one have basically informed the other, and there are breakthroughs from those fields learning from each other. My thesis is that agents are for intelligence, or I'm sorry, AI is for intelligence as agents are for behavior. And in the behavior space for agents, I think there's eventually going to be a similar cross-fertilization between this agent R&D and financial supervision. All right, so that may sound absurd at first, because in the supervisory world, we usually think about AI as a threat, something to be measured and monitored and managed, to have conferences about, to talk about the threats and how we address that. And most people in the AI industry think of regulation as something to be avoided, something to be navigated, maybe something to be optimized, okay? But if you look a little bit closer, there are some similarities. There's some similarities between agents and what happens in the financial supervision world. And the first is that agents and financial institutions are acting in an information-rich, dynamic, complex environment. First, okay. Second, they're very guided by incentives, and these incentives are imperfect. They're imperfect incentives to drive towards certain behaviors. And as we'll talk about, Goodhart's law applies, and so it's very hard to control these fully. And so you get some unexpected outcomes in both instances. And the third is that fully controlling them deterministically is not something you actually want. Part of the value to society is enabling both agents and banks and financials to act autonomously. But you have to do that within guardrails, because if you don't do that within guardrails, you get unexpected outcomes that can be catastrophic. So in all of these cases, you get these similarities. And I think that I'm going to talk through a couple examples where I think both fields can learn from each other and need to learn from each other. So where am I going to start? Let's start with the London whale. Okay, so London whale, JP Morgan Chase, and reward hacking, which is an AI firm. Okay, so I see some familiar faces around the room. Please keep me honest on the London whale. So around 2011, late 2011, there are some rumors that there's a trader at JP that's amassing quite a large position in credit default swaps on credit indices, CDX, investment grade, CDX high grade. And by the early parts of 2012, Jamie Dimon basically had to go out in the press and say, look, this is a, quote, tempest in the teapot. Not his best quote. Because shortly after that, JP takes a $2 billion loss. And then a couple months after that, that turned into a $6 billion loss. And for those who aren't in finance, it's actually pretty hard to lose $6 billion. But this trader managed to do it. What happened? So earlier in 2011, the board at JP had approved a couple of strategic objectives. And these objectives are pretty standard objectives. One is like increased revenue. Every board probably approves increased revenue. Another objective was to keep risk-weighted assets flat. Again, that's not crazy because you, as a bank, risk-weighted assets determines how much capital you have to hold. Capital is expensive. You want to husband that. So you put these things together, increase revenue, keep capital flat. That's basically higher risk-adjusted returns. The encouragement to the businesses, work a bit harder, find better clients, find better deals that kind of fit this. That's the overall kind of message. But you have this chief investment office. Now, the investment portfolio of these banks is generally pretty boring, right? The investment portfolio is not a high rocket fuel trading exciting. This is a long only, generally highly rated securities, treasuries, highly rated corporates, et cetera. But at JP, there was a structured credit trading desk. And usually derivatives in the investment portfolio, they're just for hedging, not really to make money. But the line between P&L and hedging can be a blurry one. And so the structured credit desk starts taking some bets, starts making some money. But then this overall strategic objective of more revenue, flat RWA comes down. And of course, that's a metric. Banks have lots and lots of metrics. These metrics get utilized. People kind of index off of them. And there's a trader, Bruno Ixil, who said, how am I going to do this? How am I going to basically increase my revenue while keeping my RWA flat? Well, in the investment portfolio, the risk systems are different than the investment bank. This is back then. And turns out, if you took long short positions in derivatives and they netted, it looked like zero risk. Okay, so if there's any traders in the room, you're like, aha, this is a hack. You can take a lot of basis risk, make some money off of the basis risk, or you're long and short similar positions, but the risk system shows zero risk. So your RWA is flat, and then you can basically earn money off of the basis risk. Now, the problem with this strategy is that if you're JP Morgan Chase, to move the needle revenue-wise, you have to take enormous positions. You can't just trade a little bit. You got to trade a lot. And so what ends up happening is for him, Ixil, to make money on this, he takes positions that are so large, he becomes the market. And once you become the market, you're dead, because the market figures out there's a whale, and all you have to do is just trade against the whale, and you will win. And so we've seen this over and over, the Hunt brothers, Amaranth, et cetera. So financial history has it. So that ends badly for JP. So why am I telling this story? An AI researcher who, if you gave this fact pattern to an AI researcher, would say, that's reward hacking. What is reward hacking? So there's a paper back in 2016. Back then, it was Dario Amodei and Jack Clark when they were at OpenAI. And it's a paper about reward hacking. And they are evaluating this a game called, I think it's called Coast Runners. It's like a speedboat game, right? It's like an arcade game, and the little speedboat goes around the track. And every so often, it picks up a flag that gives it points. And you're supposed to try to win the race. It's like a car race, but it's on water. And so at this point, this is like pre-AlphaGo, where they're using a lot of AI. They're training a lot of AI in games, right? Because these are contained things, and they're seeing how they do. And this particular AI, the track goes around. There's a little lagoon on the side, and there's extra flags in that lagoon. And so it's an intentional distraction. If you want to get some extra points, but it slows you down, do you do that or not? Anyone who plays a video game understands this is part of the gaming experience. And the AI puts the boat over there and just goes round and round in circles. It never leaves the lagoon. It kind of figures out, I'll just pick up these flags, and if I just keep going round and round, the flags reappear. And so it wins the game by not racing. It wins the game by getting stuck in this lagoon and doing it a loop. And the researchers thought this was interesting because on the one hand, it actually did what they told it to do, which is to get as many points as possible. But it did it in a way that was not aligned with how people think about the game. The game is like, you're actually supposed to race it and finish the race first. And so this field of reward hacking is where the machine at that point is fairly naive to what the purpose of the game was. It just was told, get some points, and it did something else counterintuitive to what we think. Fast forward, this has now become an entire field of study. And if you look at any of the model cards for AI releases, including the Mythos preview that just came out, it's 244 pages, but it's worth reading. These model cards are quite good. They're quite, don't read all the Twitter posts and stuff. Like, read the actual card, because there's a lot of information there. All of them contain passages about reward hacking, because now the AIs have gotten smart enough where they can start to intuit, oh, I'm being tested. I know I'm being tested, and I know I'm being rewarded for this. So are there things that I can do to do even better on the test? And what's happening is that, let's see, these benchmarks, everyone refers to these benchmarks. You get these charts where the scores go up and up and up. And now there's a challenge where all these benchmarks are getting contaminated and saturated, meaning that they're being gamed. They're being reward hacked. They're being arbitraged. It's a little bit like the London whale, and we have to be careful. And so here, I think that these supervisors have been dealing with regulatory arbitrage for a long time. This is something that's just kind of part of the ether of supervision. AI is now starting to deal with this, and I think there's things that can be learned in each other's fields as each field kind of learns how to grapple with that and how to move forward. That's the first. So the second area is harness engineering and the three lines of defense. Okay, so what is harness engineering? Earlier this year, OpenAI released Codex, and Anthropic released Cowork. both of these products, in both of the releases, both firms noted humans wrote 0 lines of code. 0. So if you've used Codex, Codex is extremely powerful. It's like the version of Claude Code, but for OpenAI. It's over 1 million lines of code. OpenAI explicitly went and said, humans are going to write 0 lines of code. The agent is going to write the code for the new thing that it's going to create. And same thing happened on Anthropic. They used Claude Code to make Boa. They did it in 10 days. And I think most estimates were, if you did it with human lines of code, that would have taken 100 days. So like 10x in terms of time. So what? Well, if you read both of those institutions as they describe their building of this, they both mention harnesses. And what is a harness? So a harness, first I say, what is an agent? Like, what's the difference between an LLM and an agent? An LLM is what everyone probably has open on their laptops right now. It's a little chat bot. You can type questions into it, it gives you a response. Okay? Prompt, response. An agent is an LLM with context, with tools, with instructions. There's all this stuff around it, and you package that together, and that's the agent. And the agent can do things. So you can ask an LLM, how do I build this thing? And you can tell an agent, build this thing, and it will go build it. If it has the right context, the right tools, the right instructions. And both Anthropic and OpenAI, they describe their processes of building these things without humans writing code. And it's because they put these harnesses, and these harnesses are it takes both institutions a bit of time to learn, like how do you steer these things? It's not pure intelligence. These things aren't improved because the underlying models are purely smarter. They are smarter, but that's the bigger unlock is the harness. And if you go into the AI world now, everyone's developing harnesses. Like all the major labs, all the major hyperscalers, everyone's realizing that the harness is the unlock to productivity for enterprises, for individuals. If you look at the harness, what is the harness? The harness is basically a set of instructions. It's a set of instructions to a model to say, when do you do something? Which tool do you call? When do you not call it? What are the limits on that? Like you have to define those things, because if you don't define those things, it'll just run off and get into these endless loops that are not productive. And you have to be very careful about how you do that. And that builds in mechanisms into the agent itself. So has anyone here used Claude Code or Codex? Okay. Oh, great. Actually, quite a few people. This is a good sign for NYU, because most audiences, it's like 1 or 2 hands. Here, about half the hands went up, which is great. So the first time you use it, we're going to look for folks to keep me honest on this. If you're a non-coder, so I'm not a coder, you type in an instruction, and it starts spinning, and then it pops up a message. Do you want me to do the following thing, yes or no? You click yes. You think about it, you research it. I'm not sure what that is. Yes. And then it thinks for a little bit, do you want me to do the following thing? Yes. And then it thinks, do you want me to do the following thing? You're like, okay, this is a little bit tiresome. Now there's one that says yes in all similar instances. You're like, let me do that one. And then about 10 clicks later, you're like, this is kind of boring, because now I'm just approving everything. And then you look it up on the web, and you realize there's an instruction, dangerously skip permission. So if you do / dangerously skip permissions, it auto approves all these steps, and it just does it. And so when you hear stories about people like going to bed at night and letting their agent run, that's what they're doing. Now, why does that matter? Because we think a lot in terms of human in the loop for controls for AI. That human in the loop concept is actually very parallel to the 3 lines of defense in banking. Right? In banking and supervision, we've had this concept of the 3 lines of defense for quite a while, since the late 90s, early 2000s. The first line is the business. Right? They go out and they make the money. The second line is risk management, independent risk management. They aggregate the risk. They provide independent controls and validation to say, hey, is this risk taking within tolerance, et cetera? And then the third line is internal audit, just making sure that all the controls are actually doing their thing. Okay? And that concept has been around for a lot. And supervisors and external auditors and other oversight bodies rely a lot on those 3 lines of defense to make sure that things are kind of kept in control. What we learned, though, in the '08 crisis is that it's not a clean 3 lines of defense. You don't want the first line to just be off to the races and not thinking about risk at all. That's not a good idea. You want some of that risk DNA, some of that risk management, some of those capabilities to be in the first line. And so after the crisis, there was actually quite a push to have the first line do more of the risk management. And I think there are some parallels here between that and what's happening with this harness engineering. There's a lot of chatter now in AI that code review is antiquated. There are some folks that like code review is when the thing writes the code and then people review the code. But now we're getting to the point where code is being generated so fast that it doesn't make sense for people to have a backlog of agent, generated code to kind of click approve, 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 approve. Probably not. So what do? So you really have to start bringing some of those safety and control concepts into the front line. And I think, again, here, there's rich space for code research on how these harnesses are being developed, what's effective, and how supervision constructs itself and thinks about the first, second, and third lines of defense. Because increasingly, you have to match the complexity and the speed at which these things develop. And there's just not enough people that can cover enough area fast enough. So you really have to engineer these things in. Now, one thing that's interesting is if you unpack these harnesses and look at them in different instances, they have elements of supervision in them. It's not just one agent that runs off and builds something. Often there's another agent that does the checking, another agent that does the evaluation, another agent. So those different agents are playing roles that are kind of analogous to risk managers. They're analogous to controllers. Folks are checking things to make sure that the thing works. And again, if you've used these tools 6 months ago or so, these things would break all the time. You get bugs. They're much, much better now. It's not just the pure intelligence, it's the harness. Third topic is culture, which is much harder. After the '08 crisis, the first order of business was rebuild capital, rebuild liquidity. And again, I can look around the room and see some familiar faces who are part of that project, rebuilding capital, rebuilding liquidity, make banks resolvable, that kind of thing. At some point, the regulatory community started to think, okay, that's good. Those are important things. But the root cause is culture, right? The root cause is what is the culture of the organization that's risk-taking, that's trying to balance the risk-taking with risk management. And I think it can just be said without too much research that the culture of Wall Street and banking pre-2008 was not healthy, right? And it led to something that was quite catastrophic for everybody. A lot of innocent folks got hurt. So there were attempts to say, we should study this. And many conferences, many meetings, many discussions, it didn't get that far. I mean, the one thing that regulators could agree on was incentive compensation. Okay, we should kind of tweak that because it's tangible. You can kind of write it down. You can put your arms around it. But all this other stuff was quite hard, actually. And the Dutch central bank, they actually tried to quantify it. And they had teams studying boards of director dynamics and doing all these things, which in the regulatory community were quite interesting, actually, to talk about. It's very hard to operationalize. And I think it is interesting to take a concrete example. So if you look, one concrete example is Morgan Stanley. I just know Morgan Stanley very well. I supervised them for many years from different angles. Pre-2008, Morgan Stanley was very confused about what they wanted to be. They had a series of CEOs that were from Dean Witter, from Credit Suisse. Do they want to be a trading shop like Goldman? Yes. Do they want to be a distribution shop like Lehman? Yes. Do they want to be a financial advisory shop like Merrill? Yes. So it's just kind of pulling in a bunch of different directions. And then they get to the crisis and they have a huge loss. They have one trading, if you've seen The Big Short, there's one trading desk at Morgan Stanley, they lose $8 billion on 14 trades. And there's a lot of cultural problems there. James Gorman comes in after that, and he's got a clarity of vision to say, this is not healthy. And strategically, it should not be Goldman, Lehman, all these things kind of patched together. It should be Morgan Stanley, which is basically a half of it is financial advisory, wealth management, and a half of it is investment banking related to that. and it'll be stable. And people laughed at him when he actually came up with this. But he stuck with that. That was a strategy. That was what they drove towards. Where does culture come in? As part of that strategy, he had to fire probably a quarter to a third, maybe a half of the fixed income traders. That is hard to do. Not only that, not only did he fire them, then there were complaints from all the other traders inside saying, wait a second, I want to get paid like my peers on the street, pay me like these other guys. And Gorman was very steadfast. He would go on to CNBC and Bloomberg and say, no, if you want that kind of pay, go. This is how we're running things in this shop. It was cultural, as a regulator, it was interesting to observe culturally that all playing out. And pre-08, Morgan was kind of the ugly stepchild to Goldman and some other high flyers. Today, Morgan's market cap exceeds Goldman Sachs's. Right? I think most people would say Morgan Stanley was kind of the turtle that pulled ahead, both in terms of its business and its strategy and its culture, relative to many of its peers. And there's something there that's worth studying, and that I think we should think about. And then on the AI side, it's also quite interesting. How many people here have heard of Anthropic's Constitution, the Claude Constitution? Okay, it's a strange document, but Anthropic put together this thing called the Constitution. Actually, the way this Constitution came out is quite interesting. There's all these like interesting researchers out there, and every time there's a model release, they try to hack the model and kind of find out what they can. And there was a guy who was just kind of poking around, and he noticed that there was a file called soul.md. What's that? And he asks around, and he gets no answers, and he speculated that there's some document that is kind of guiding the soul of Claude. And sure enough, there's this thing called the Constitution, and Anthropic basically releases it. It's 20,000 words long, quite long. I highly encourage you to read it. It's interesting because it's different than what you expect. They talk about in that document how, in one ideal world, what we do with these LLMs is we just give them strict do's and don'ts. Here's a bunch of do's, here's a bunch of don'ts, and we would just move on with life. It's very clear. A bunch of very bright line rules, right? They're machines after all, like they should just give them bright line rules. And they realized in doing all the research and work with that doesn't work, because life is not limited to those rules that you can enumerate. Life is very, very complicated. It's basically, you've got a critical mass of things that you can kind of predict, and then there's everything else is an edge case. And it's actually the edge cases that are all interesting. It's the edge cases that are valuable, right? Because if it could be programmed, we would have programmed it already. And so if you've got that, like, what do you do then? And they basically lay out a case for ethics and values and judgment. Like, how do you build that into an AI, into an LLM? And it's quite expository. And they don't necessarily say they have all the answers, but this is what they're aiming to do. And the thesis is, if an LLM has good judgment, it'll be more trustworthy. If an LLM has good values, it'll be more trustworthy. Just like a person, right? If a person has good judgment, good values, integrity, you're going to rely on them, you're going to trust them. So they try to build that in. Okay, put that off to the side for a moment. Later, you get this development called OpenClaw. How many people here have heard of OpenClaw? Okay, almost everybody. Right. OpenClaw is interesting because A, it's open source. It's like an agent, you guys can all download it. Don't download it unless you're very, very, very clear of the security risks. There are a lot of security risks. But it's interesting because it's an agent that just runs 24 hours a day. It's persistent, it remembers everything, it runs all the time. And for the folks who can navigate it and use it, they say it's life-changing because it can basically read your mind and do all these things for you without you even instructing. The creator of OpenClaw has a document called the Soul MD. It's not 20,000 words long. It's quite short. You can actually just pull it up right now, OpenClaw Soul MD. And that document is pretty playful, actually. I think part of the reason why there's so much draw to OpenClaw is it has kind of a fun personality. It's a little bit mischievous, which I think kind of appeals to folks who like to do that kind of thing. But that mischievousness, I think, is part of what also makes it performant. And I think folks that use it say it's quite performant as an agent. These things, I think, have really kind of sparked like, what is the culture of these agents as they operate? And this seems at first like a fun academic topic for a conference, but the ratio of agents to humans is about to explode, right? Today, I think IBM or it's either IBM or Gartner, they track like the number of non-personal identities that are out there. And I think it's like 50 to 1 now. That's going to go to 500 to 5,000 to 1 pretty soon because these agents are so easy to create. And the question is like, what is the culture of the agents that are being created? That's going to matter. And what guides that? And I think we're still grappling with this. The AI labs are still grappling with this. We as supervisors are still grappling with this in terms of institutions and supervisors. So I think, again, these are fields of research where both sides can learn quite a bit from each other as they learn these things, and they kind of feed those experiences back and forth. So those are kind of the 3 examples I wanted to hit. Again, I think this is a rich area because LLMs were really focused on intelligence. We spend a lot of time focusing on intelligence. Intelligence. It makes sense that neuroscience and AI would kind of co-evolve in that way. Now going forward, the key is about behavior. Like the intelligence is important, but now folks, to monetize this, to make it productive, to make it change the world, these things have to act. It's not just the head, it's the head and the hands, as they say. And so in that set of actions, those behaviors, like what are the scientific fields, what are the research fields that really hit those? And I think it's on the agent R&D side and on the financial supervision side, there's a lot to learn from each other. With that, I'll stop and just see if there's any questions or comments. Dick.
Mike, can I take the prerogative of the conference organizer? So in thinking about what you've just talked about, I'm wondering how risk managers should think about model risk management for agents and for LLMs and other AI tools. Because, when we think about model risk management and risk management, we have kind of a deterministic framework. That's not what this is about.
Yes.
It is probabilistic. Sometimes you're going to get a different answer depending on the time of day. From the same prompt and the same LLM. So what are the criteria we should be using for managing the risk of the model?
So this is a very rich research field. So if you're in the academics, focus on Dick's question. This is an important question. Model risk management, SR 11-7. Okay, so those who are in the Wilson's laughing. Okay, if you're in the banking space, you know this guidance. SR 11-7 is the model risk management guidance from the Fed. Been around since 2011. It has a very particular structure to it. And that structure is heavily focused on validation. It has a gatekeeping orientation. Bank develops a model, that model cannot be deployed until it passes through model risk management. And the model risk manager, the independent model risk manager has to say, I understand that model, I validated that model, here's all the documentation, here's all the tests, here's everything, green light, go. Okay? That works for single purpose calculators. My term, single purpose calculators. Because generally a model is doing one thing. It's estimating VAR. It's calculating a credit score. It's generating a valuation. Those are single purpose calculators. That works well for that. LLMs are not single purpose calculators. They're the opposite of single purpose. They're general purpose technologies. And agents are general purpose technologies that can then enter loops and do things themselves. So the federal banking agencies about a week ago basically updated 11-7 with something now called SR 26-2. New numbers. 26-2 both narrows the scope of model risk management, but more importantly, it scopes out Gen AI and agentic. They are scoped out of model risk management. And I think that's actually the right move. Because what the worst place to be for financial stability is false comfort. And I was getting worried that MRM was providing false comfort over Gen AI and agents because it's not fit for purpose. What's the latest research now on how do you apply some of the principles of risk management to agents is what's called like runtime governance. It's to say you have to both kind of build in the right, it's like almost like the harness engineering. You build in the trust and the controls into the agent itself, and you've got runtime governance. You are constantly governing it in real time, all the time. And you're not doing a spot check to give it a license. You're not doing it an enforcement check later on. It's continuous. And I think that's the direction of travel. How exactly that, what the parameters of that are, what good looks like, TBD. And that's why I just encourage folks to research that, because I think folks are grappling with this. And as a regulator, I think it's very important that we have minimum standards on this, because a lot of folks are going to attack this, and it's going to be great, and they're going to realize this is very expensive. It's expensive from a token perspective to have all these things running all the time, but that expense may be necessary to trust it, and then there will be a race to the bottom unless we can kind of figure out what are some minimum standards that we can agree to.
Great.